Classical Stuff You Should Know. We are a podcast about classical education, the world of old stuff. We are three guys that like talking about this. We work at a classical school here in Austin, Texas called Veritas Academy. And classics. We love them. It's good stuff.
Yep, nailed
Rock and roll.
Yep, cool.
Nailed it.
Yep.
My name is Graham Donaldson, and I am here with my associates, my colleagues, Mr. Arthur Jan Hannenberg.
That's me.
And Mr. Thomas Magby.
Hello. Associates. I feel like...
Associates.
Yeah, like we got promoted or something. That's good.
Well, I feel like associates, that feels a little cold.
Oh, sorry. What would you rather call
My
us?
brothers.
Oh, wow. What a guy.
Like, yeah. I'm going to do what I think we should probably be doing and then say, like, we've been only talking about the Patreon at, like, the end of the episode and everyone stops listening.
Sure, yes.
So we have, just before we get into the podcast, we have set up a Patreon page where there's some little extra goodies that you can, if you are a member of our Patreon, you can get access to. And I forgot them. What are they?
What are the benefits?
Benefits?
$5 level, you get all of our episodes, which will be ad-free, even as we add on ads to this regular podcast. We also offer some additional talks that we've given outside of the podcast. You can access those through the Patreon. At the $10 a month level, you get access. You can ask us questions for a monthly Ask Us Anything. You also...
That's where they get the between banter, right?
And the banter between the episodes.
Oh, that's right. We have very interesting and elucidating banter in between the episodes where we talk about such topics as
the modern global order and Bitcoin.
That's right. We talked about Bitcoin. We've talked about my theory about that we're living in the 19th century.
Talked about rappers a little while ago.
We did.
Did you delete that one, or is that actually going to go up?
No, like last week. What did we talk about the week before?
A while ago?
Anyway, so we got some fun banter where we're just like getting the episode set up.
Yeah, you just get to hear what we talk about in between, which is some of my favorite stuff.
It's kind of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And then what's the last level?
At $20 a month, you get to propose topics for us to talk about.
That's right.
Propose and then vote on topics for us to talk about. And you also eventually...
We'll do them.
Yeah, we'll do them. Say we won't. We'll do it. And also get to help us decide on merchandise and other stuff that we would sell as a part of the podcast.
And also, yeah, giving thoughts on other...
It's like helping us like shape the direction of where the podcast will go. That's why we call them Aristotelians. They are the best of us.
So cool. And so maybe if I wanted to do that, where would I find that?
You would find that at patreon.com/classical stuff.
Rock and roll. Okay.
I'm feeling very salesy right now.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I like it.
Okay.
So we are now, if I looked at the notes properly, we're talking about my ability that I lie to children.
You are a liar.
I'm
yes,
a liar.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Your profession is lying. I like that you pretend that we have notes for these episodes. That's the real joke. That's the real punchline of your...
They can see us on YouTube now. There's
Crap, there goes all the mystique.
Nobody's fooled.
Yeah.
No, you just like put the paper in front of the microphone and hope that it makes it sound like we're shuffling papers. All right. Yes. So today is my episode. Usually, I don't know if Graham says this on air usually, but before most of his episodes, he'll say, I don't know if I'm actually going to fill an hour. I'm actually feeling that way right now. So we'll see how this goes.
I don't think I'm going to fill an hour next week.
Have you? Okay. But when has that ever happened? So if this is a short one, then rock and roll. I'm fine with that.
Are you saying I do not eschew surplusage?
Why? Is that what book is that from? The Style Guide? The Stone and Bell?
I don't think that's Stone and Bell. That is Mark Twain's version of the Stone and Bell rule, which is prefer the shorter to the longer.
That was my Wi-Fi password for a while.
Was it
eschew
really?
surplusage? I figured no one would get it.
That's a good one.
No one would randomly do. Oh, crap.
You have to change your password now? Yeah. Seriously, you have to change your password now?
Do you have a bank password?
Yeah, seriously. What's your social security number?
Email and...
Those are a really good episode.
Bitcoin for life.
Why are you like this? I would actually believe that 100%. Those are good episodes. AJ led those on How to Write Gooder, I think is the title, is where those come from. So if you want to write gooder, you should listen to those. Okay, so the topic for today is vague and amorphous, as most of mine are. So as a part of posting our videos to YouTube, by the way, all of our episodes are up on YouTube if you want to go listen to them there. That gave me a chance to revisit a lot of our old topics, to remind myself of what we talked about like years ago at this point. What episode number are we on roughly at this point?
Are we counting quarantine stuff you should know?
I don't think so.
If we do, there was like
we can.
a good 15 or 20 in there.
I don't think those count. So I think
we're up in the 120s.
Is that it? What are we? This is 80 episodes ago. Then we had an episode called Why English Teachers Aren't Liars. It's a great episode. It's episode 45. Go listen to it if you want to. Graham led a discussion on a theme in Romeo and Juliet, and he presented this evidence, and it's super frustrating because AJ like agreed with it. There was like no conflict. It was just like way too happy. So
it's the way the world should work.
Nope, it isn't. So today we're going to try again on a similar idea of what that episode was getting at. And listener, don't worry, we'll get into what that idea is. So I don't actually have a title for this episode. It's probably something more akin to why English teachers are liars, or potentially the limits of allegory, because I like bombastic titles like that. But as an introduction to what we'll actually spend our time talking about, I don't know what fear and dread you all bring in coming into your episodes, but I had my moment a few days ago of realizing I needed to come up with a topic, and rushing through my notes to find something, and found a quote from a book that I read years ago that I've always wanted to get y'all's reaction to. So we're going to do that live on air.
Ready to react.
Yeah. So if you could be just like filled with rage, that would really make my day.
No, I'm getting into a place where maximum reaction will hit.
I do a lot of YouTube unboxings, so I'm already ready for this.
You're really used to this.
I do a lot of reaction videos.
But that's only like excitement, isn't it? Like, what about...
Well, I also do reaction videos to like what PewDiePie said last week. Like I watch his videos and then I do reaction videos.
Tell me anything PewDiePie said last week. Just anything. Go for it.
He said like, well, I'm a
Norwegian.
I'm a Swedish guy. Yeah. I love my wife.
Oh, is he married?
Yeah, he married Marzia.
Who's Marzia? Don't know who Marzia is.
Like his girlfriend.
Okay.
Well, now wife.
Okay, cool, great.
She seems very nice.
Homestar Runner's girlfriend?
Marzia?
That's marzipan.
Oh.
That's different. Okay, we're off to a good start. Okay, so we will be...
Well, I'm Homestar Runner.
What just happened? Oh, you want to do more Homestar Runner impersonations?
Right,
that would be a much better episode if we did that. So I will be reading a section from a book by David Whyte. Do you all know David Whyte?
Nope.
Nope.
So I'll be talking about a book of his from the 90s, and I'll get to that in a second.
It's not classical.
It's not classical, but we'll get into a classical idea as
like
part of
the
this.
90s.
Oh, yeah.
Like 0090.
Yeah,
90, like only a few years
2,000
after.
years ago is not enough for you.
Yeah. Welcome to the 90s, boys.
I love the 90s.
Party like it's
80s, 90s.
99.
It's the worst. So David Whyte is author of a few books. He is a poet first and foremost, but also has written, I guess, other books as well. I'll just read his bio. This is from his website. I will focus on, I've condensed it, so apologies in advance to David Whyte, who I'm sure is avid listener of the podcast. That would actually make my day if he was. Poet David Whyte grew up with a strong imaginative influence from his Irish mother among the hills and valleys of his father's Yorkshire. He now makes his home in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Woo. The author, oh yeah, there you go. But he lives on like an island off the coast of Washington.
San Juan?
Is it the San Juans?
I don't know. Are those the only islands that are up there?
Beautiful.
He's somewhere up there. I listened to do y'all listen to On Being with Krista Tippett ever?
I actually think I've listened to one or two on those.
Anyway, he did an interview with her. David Whyte is still alive. But anyway, he talked about living on the island.
90s?
What?
Old guy.
So just stick with me. Yeah, he's 2,000 years old. He's great. He's the new Methuselah. The author of 9 books of poetry and 4 books of prose, David Whyte holds a degree in marine zoology, honorary degrees from Newman College and Royal Roads University, and has traveled extensively, including living and working as a naturalist guide in the Galapagos Islands and leading anthropological and natural history expeditions in the Andes, Amazon, and Himalayas.
Cool.
Brings a wealth of experience to his poetry, lectures, and workshops. I feel like, AJ, you and him would get along with that as his background.
Turtle poet,
and this whole like Washington connection. Anyway,
sounds like a cool guy.
I think he would like his poetry too, which we won't actually be reading because why would we? This is just this final paragraph which dovetails with the point of the book that we'll talk about. In organizational settings, using poetry and thoughtful commentary, he illustrates how we can foster qualities of courage and engagement, qualities needed if we are to respond to today's call for increased creativity and adaptability in the workplace. He brings a unique and important contribution to our understanding of the nature of individual and organizational change, particularly through his unique perspective on conversational leadership. So he does many things, poetry, writing books, all that stuff. He also works with companies to take classical stories and incorporate them into how they understand what they do and how they work together primarily. This feels like something that we should be doing. Doesn't that feel like we should talk about how...
Can you imagine us standing in front of a boardroom and being like, "What's up, guys? What classical stuff you should know? Here's how you can sell more stuff."
In the same way that Odin plucked his eye out, we should sacrifice for the shareholders. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess that would go really well, right?
Ragnarok's coming, balance sheet, recession.
In the same way that bankruptcy is coming to this company. So prepare, run for the hills. Okay, so
your new cologne, Corpse Dragon.
I would like that. Oh, we're going to be product consultants too. We'll be talking about The Heart Aroused is the book from the 1990s. He also has a wonderful book that's much more recent called Consolations that I really, really like. Cool. It's a collection of essays, and he goes like word by word and just writes an essay on them. So ambition, beauty, confession, courage, crisis, longing, maturity, just like, anyway, it's the series of essays just on single words, and it's great.
Does he teach at a place right now, or is he just the consulting when he does?
I don't know, is what I should say. He is an associate fellow of the SAID, S-A-I-D, with an umlaut over the I, business school at the University of Oxford. So, yes, also teaching as a part of that too. Travels and lectures throughout the world. So, there you go. He does a lot of stuff. And he has a great voice, so you should listen to interviews of him also. Okay, we'll get into the book itself, I guess, is where we should go. So the name of this book is The Heart Aroused, and the subtitle is Poetry and the Preservation of the Soul in Corporate America. How do you like that for a title?
Dang.
Isn't that a good title? He brings in a number of stories into this book to make his points about, again, how to preserve your soul in corporate America. And this first I think I first came across this from a 2011 list from John Acuff, if you all follow him. This was one of his favorite books from 2011, so it's been on my radar for a while. The first two chapters, his anchoring story is Beowulf. So this will be AJ asking you how you feel about this as we go. There are, I guess, two stories that will center our discussion, and then we'll just see where they go from there. The first one is shorter, so I'll just read from the book. The second one is longer, so as always, I mean, I don't need to give you permission. You all do this anyway, but feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have a comment to make. So David White brings in the story of Beowulf to talk about work, to talk about, I guess I should just leave it at that. This is, I don't know if you all do this before your episodes, the most quoted quote from the book, the most quoted passage from the book, according to Goodreads, is this line, which ties in with our first reading. It is not the thing you fear that you must deal with. It is the mother of the thing you fear, the very thing that has given birth to the nightmare.
Grendel's mom.
So that's this first connection. I'll read this.
He's using the story of Beowulf to
get certain lessons out of it.
Get lessons sort of as launching off points to talk about sort of how to applied wisdom, or maybe wisdom is applied wisdom, to how to be wise in like a corporate setting or in a business setting. Okay.
Let me just by way of example, and there are a few quotes in here. I'll try and indicate where those are. So hopefully this makes sense. Beginning his description of the lake and sensing the tension of the moment, the anonymous bard telling the story says that no one knows where Grendel or his mother comes from. Quote, they named the huge one Grendel. If he had a father, no one knew him, or whether there had been others before these two, hidden evil before hidden evil. End quote. You can blame your mother, you can blame your father and his father for the problems with which you are destined to wrestle, but ultimately you are the one in whom they have made a home. You are the one who must say, thus far and no farther, and then go down and confront them yourself. Quote, they live in secret places, windy cliffs, wolf dens, where water pours from the rocks, then runs underground, where mist steams like black clouds. When the story tells us that they live in secret places, we are being told that Grendel's mother is the living incarnation of our disowned side, which has been forced to live in unfamiliar places, the fading moon portion of ourselves. That's this is a shortened version of what we'll get longer in the next section.
And that's a big quote from Beowulf.
There were two quotes in there. Sorry, I don't think I indicated where the second one ended. It ended with the steams like black clouds.
Gotcha.
Quote ended, and then David White adds, when the story tells us that they live in secret places, we are being told that Grendel's mother is the living incarnation of our disowned side. That's David White interjecting at that point.
So he's doing like a hero's journey, allegorical reading of Beowulf kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure he references the hero's journey. I don't think any of my quotes directly point to those parts, but he is trying to like pull out pieces and say, this is, so again, what does it mean that Grendel has no father? What does it mean that we don't know where these things come from? It means that we have our own problems that we must deal with. We can't blame people that come before us.
I know I'm not trying to derail you on this, but someone else who does this kind of thing and has gotten popularity for doing this kind of thing is Jordan Peterson.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like he does that with the Bible and I think he's done it with Pinocchio. Like this kind of modern psychology using these sort of psychological readings, very Jungian readings of these stories to talk about human personalities and that kind of stuff for the purpose of like something practical, like practicality in the workplace or in your own life.
I heard Peterson do one with the Lion King episode.
Yeah. Hope he's doing well. He had a breakdown, I think.
He did. I think he's
sick. Or he was ill, or had a he was.
Well, he'd only been eating red meat for like 4 months.
No. Yeah, well, that too, but anyway.
I don't know the details of that.
Neither do I. Don't really. It's not really a story I followed.
No. AJ, I mean, this is a book that you teach. Do you have any thoughts on White's approach so far? Again, I'll give you a longer example in a second if you want to think more about it. But does anything strike you as we dive into this?
So a couple things. We do know where
the Grendel within, AJ.
We do know where they came from. They came from Cain's clan.
Sure.
Right? So that's one thing. And when he talks about our disowned side, that must be what he's referring to is Cain, right? Cain and their bunch. Because we know that that's where they descend from.
It's interesting because White doesn't explicitly bring that in, but you might agree with what he's saying, but actually have a deeper, like, there is a part of us that's the evil side, which would be the Cain side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not disagreeing.
Cain,
with
as in like Cain and Abel Cain?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Cain. Like that's supposedly where the demons come from. We also know where they live. Like she lives in a specific mirror that they go and find, and Beowulf swims in. It's filled with lizards.
A mirror?
Mirror.
Like the water?
Like an actual mirror.
Okay.
Where the cats come from.
You could find it at night. So
I'm so mad at how good that joke is. Sorry.
What, the cat?
Did you hear what he said? He said where the cats come from. The meerkats. Sorry.
Meerkats.
It's really
funny. Anyway, I wonder at the compulsion to take these readings and make them allegorical when I'm not sure they were in the first place.
Yeah, you tripped AJ hates this stuff. The allegorical readings.
Like it seems like a reduction, right? This story would have originally been told by a bard who was singing it to a group of people in like a castle, like at a feast, right? They would have had big. It was entertainment, and entertainment supposed to be a fun story. I don't know that it was originally written with allegory in mind or with symbolism in mind. Like we can read all sorts of symbolism into it, but at some point, I wonder if it isn't just a story of a Viking killing monsters, right?
This was my point in the English Teachers Aren't Liars podcast, though.
Kind of. We'll end with a different point, I think. Do you want to say what you...
Well, it's just that if you're going to do that, the text needs to give you enough clues that it wants you to do that. So the example that I gave, that we were doing Romeo and Juliet is the fact that there are so many allusions to light and dark and so many allusions to religious conversion, you then are allowed, or your case has a little more credence because all of these sort of motifs are sprinkled throughout Act 1. Sure. And if this is confusing,
go back and listen.
You'll have to go back to listen to that
45.
one.
Yep.
But so that leads you to say, like, okay, it's probable because of this motif that we can sort of say this allegory that Romeo is like the dark and Juliet is like the light.
Yes.
Because the text has sort of given you enough breadcrumbs to do it.
Sure. I will say the main reason I wanted to do another episode is, first off, the next section is the one where I'll be curious how you two respond and if it's different or not. But your point in that last episode was primarily around a theme within the work itself and whether Shakespeare is using this as a theme within the work.
He wants to do like the universal human experience.
Yes. Yeah, so he's doing something... what's the right way to say it? It's like the application of this book to say that what Grendel is actually, or what Grendel's mother actually is the mother of your problems, which is the problem you must deal with. Does that make sense? Like it's not only within the book, it's then to say, how do we apply this book to our lives? That's the next step that White is attempting to do here. And I'm curious if we like what he does here, what reaction we have.
I don't mind application. I mind that if he says that is what this is about, it reduces the story to something lesser.
Sure.
Right. In my opinion, a lot of the allegorical readings, unless it really is allegory, do so. They say this is about that, right? Instead of Grendel's mother being what she truly is, which is a horrible monster descendant of Cain that steals her son's arm from a group of people that took it as a trophy, right? There's a lot you can talk about there, but if I say what she is the mother of your problems, and Grendel is only representative of your problems, I miss out on maybe a lot of other readings that could also happen.
I think that's fair.
My criticism of this not criticism, but my thought on this sort of thing is once you kind of, is sort of piggybacking what AJ says. I hate that phrase, piggybacking. Anyway, whatever.
Hop on here, bro. It's not going to be awkward at all.
It's like once you say that you're doing that, like it's sort of the art of doing it. So if someone was saying like, oh man, I just can't quit drinking. I'm just going to like throw away all my booze. And someone came to them and said, you don't kill Grendel, you kill Grendel's mom. Right? And that person knew the thing that you were talking about. Okay, that's sort of like an artfully applied lesson. Right. But then to sort of sit down and say like, here's how we can use literature to solve our problems. Like, I don't know. There's just something, reductionistic about doing it that way. Even though I think maybe the practicality of what he's doing is correct, but it's basically what he's doing is he's giving an analytical tool. Here's how you can read books to do X, Y, or Z, or to help to improve yourself. But if that's the only tool that people bring to stories, then at best you're just going to reduce the story. At worst, you're going to be able to like say whatever any story can sort of justify or say whatever you want.
Exactly. Yeah, that was what I was just going to say was it leaves the door open for me to make really any plausible interpretation, like my own motivations I can bring to the text.
So there needs to be like a guiding ethos behind the story.
Right.
And then like the story is a sort of a portal to using that guiding ethos. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
We will get there. We'll get there.
Cool.
I don't know. I don't know what. Let me keep on with the example he does and how he is applying this method to it, and then we'll try and kind of piece the stuff together at the end.
That's good.
So this is a longer section. At any point, please interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll just ramble for 3 pages, which I guess is most of what I do on this podcast. But anyway, feel free to cut if something especially makes you mad or you love it. Just jump in and say so. This is if you're following along at home, which would be insane. We're on page 54 of The Heart Aroused. So whatever, live your life. Whatever. Just do whatever you want to. I'm not your dad. Whatever. Okay. Clad in his web of rings, Beowulf leaps into the water and sinks to the very bottom of the lake, where Grendel's mother waits for him. There are clear, marvelous details etched into the story at this point. Beowulf finds that the great sword Hrunting, given to him by the Danes to help him in his pitch black travail, is useless against this she-monster, as is another gift from above, the Danish king's helmet. He is forced to throw them away and wrestle barehanded with Grendel's mother. Locked together in a death-like embrace, they tumble into her den, where Beowulf sees, glowing on the wall, an unknown but marvelous sword. He breaks the chain on its hilt, and with a sudden blow kills Grendel's mother with the glowing blade. So these are accurate descriptions of what happens in the story? Roughly accurate descriptions of what happens in the story?
Yeah.
Okay. So then we move into interpretation. However well we arrange for our self-protection beforehand, our preparations are only muttered incantations to ward off the evil eye. The solution itself lies down in the water. The glamorous but useful sword given to Beowulf may also represent the attempt to rely inappropriately on technology at a crucial moment. Technology has marvelous benefits, as I can attest, sitting by my fireside, expanding this manuscript on my own personal talisman of the modern age, the laptop computer. We had those in 1994. I guess we did. But there are places where it's written.
Crank.
Yes.
Crank it.
That's exactly right.
That was the old Ford Model Q, right?
That's my favorite. Yeah. It only came in one color, though. Yeah.
Kept running out of gas. You had to put like a generator on.
But there are places where its writ does not run. So he's talking about his laptop. For instance, in that split second of creative consciousness before the finger actually strikes the keyboard. He is talking about the keyboard still. In relationship to the fluid depths of the imagination, it can only be a servant and not a master. Physically and metaphorically, my computer cannot go underwater, the way Beowulf, right? It is not built to withstand the turbulent and fathomless atmospheres of the soul, like the pressure when you're underground or under the water. Beowulf's friends wait... I think that's interpretation. I think this next one is story summary. Beowulf's friends wait all day at the very edge of the cold lake surface. The story says he is down there for a very long time, to the point where he is given up for dead. The mythic code for a very long time is usually 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. Gilgamesh was 3 days and 3 nights in the cave without food or water. 3 days and 3 nights means an initiation. It means the process goes on longer than you would have it go on. Many scholars think it is connected to the moon's disappearance for 3 days each month, the darkest stretch of the heavenly cycle. In the no responses in the
I have such huge beef already.
Can I finish it? Let me just finish it. Then. Sorry. Okay. In the course of a human life, we get to know these dark phases of existence quite well: bereavement and rejection, loss of friends, family, and familiar way signs. Sorry. A person may go through the wrenching trauma of a divorce, which seems to stretch on forever, finally saying, "This is it, God, I've learned everything I need to know from this." But the trauma continues. An organization goes through radical restructuring, and those who work for it wonder when it will ever end. 3 days and 3 nights. The temptation is not to follow through, to give up and go back to the old ways. This is the last paragraph, sorry. Whatever is needed for the moment of truth in those dire, deep places seems brought to view only in our arrival at the very bottom. So much of our experience is predicated on the consciousness with which we enter it, our future possibilities already mortgaged to past limitations. And he goes on from there.
So he is a Jungian kind of guy.
Say more.
He's doing well.
When you say that, what?
Like what the birth of philosophy of psychology, you had Freud and Jung, and Jung had this sort of view that a lot of what made up the human understanding of the world and themselves and families was sort of broken down into archetypes.
Yes.
And that these archetypes are present in all of the stories that human beings tell each other.
Yes.
And so, like, you get a story from a North American native tribe, and you get a story from a sub-Saharan African tribe, and China, and like Charlemagne, and you're going to be able to find similar, if not almost identical, archetypes.
Right.
And I think I don't know if he did it, but Jungian scholars after him put together lists of these archetypes.
That's what I was trying to look up.
The underworld, the underwater,
yeah.
And they all have to do with basically the Carl Jung, that's it, believed that these were the things. These were the sort of the processes of human development. So
Yep.
if you were going to develop or mature as a person, there were sort of stages that you went through, and these stages then ended up being crystallized into these archetypes that get woven into the stories all over humanity.
And then the process becomes, okay, let's find where these archetypes happen. We can understand the story in terms of those archetypes. Which ones? Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
I don't think he's wrong.
It sounds like an over fancy way to say when we grow up we meet hardship, and hardship makes the best stories.
Yes. Is what David White is saying in this.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that Carl Jung.
But he's getting more specific because he's actually instead of just giving like that sort of platitude, he's actually giving like
examples of it from stories.
Beats and acts. Like he's putting it into like, there's only 3 kinds of stories or whatever the famous phrase is, or
is that
5 stories, 3 stories, or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know he's wrong, but like, yes, we go through hardship, and what else can we write about beyond the common human experience? And could I put into the list the things that humans commonly deal with? Sure. I don't think that to me, it doesn't seem like that revolutionary of an understanding to think we go through things, those make good stories. They tend to be the same because we all kind of go through the same stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you two are saying the same thing.
Yeah, it seems like we're agreeing.
Yeah.
It's just the like murder to dissect kind of thing, right? Like,
what's the point of
if you then sort of put this analytical lens on the story, you may be right in finding that the story has like, oh yes, in fact it does mirror human psychology.
Yep.
But then the now what step? I mean, it like sucks the magic out of it.
My beef is that it's not an honest reading.
Oh.
Say why?
So first of all, he says like, the sword failed him, so technology failed him. Yeah. Well, what he found was also a sword. So it's like his laptop failing him, and then finding a better laptop down in, like, that's what he found was a bigger, older sword.
This is a better laptop. I mean, better graphics.
He needed
card.
better technology.
Better graphics card. Yeah, it was like the new 2070 Max Q.
That's what
better technology saved.
Better technology, and not only that,
waterproof technology.
Not only that, but like his one piece of his technology was actually integral in him surviving the fight, and that's his chainmail.
Oh,
His chainmail is a battle technology, perhaps even more recent than the sword.
To protect him from
and
Grendel's mom?
The mother's claws would have killed him if it weren't for the chainmail. And not only that, it wasn't 3 days, 3 nights. I don't know where he's getting that. Every translation I've ever read indicates that it's more around like the better part of a day.
Okay.
He's probably down there for 6 or 8 hours.
Okay.
And then when he comes up, not everyone has left.
Sure.
The Danes left. The Yeats, his picked men, were still around the ring of the place. They stayed for him.
Yeah.
And so my huge problem with this is that he is abusing the story and ignoring pertinent details to make it fit his interpretation, and that drives me crazy.
Yeah, so this is the danger of that sort of view is the actually guy. No, I'm not saying that as a criticism.
Dude.
No,
Seriously,
I'm not saying that as a
reals,
criticism. No, I'm saying that as like that's the problem. It's like if you're going to draw
significant connections.
major significance from details, then you need to get the details need to be
right. Sure.
You got to get the details straight, and you can't ignore other pertinent details. Like, yes, his technology didn't work, but other technology that he brought with him did, and he found more technology.
But AJ, do you think that if he incorporated all of those details and then brought in a reading, that you'd be cool with it?
I would be more cool with it.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you still have a problem with the way that significance is attached to what seems like details in the story?
I always am a little uncomfortable with that when I don't think the original author intended it.
Yeah.
I think this story was written as a monster story. I don't think the author was thinking
but all
like,
monster stories,
this is the representation. And I get it. If you want to interpret something about your psychology, like we all go through things like this. And if you want to talk about that, like, look, man, sometimes you got to deal with your problems. Grendel, he really was a problem. And then you got to deal with the thing that sired it and really ferret out all the last little bits.
Right.
I'm totally fine with that interpretation. It's true in the story as it is in human life because the story somewhat mirrors human life. What I don't like is when it seems like he's pushing the story like as a square peg into the round hole of his interpretation, ignoring pertinent details, and that drives me nuts.
Sure. Is Beowulf just like born super special, or do they talk about that in the story?
He's actually ignored largely in his home, the Yeats. When they send him off to go help the Danes, they didn't think he was this big amazing thing, and then he proved his worth over in Daneland, right?
Yeah.
And then when he came back, everyone's like, "Dang, this guy's the real deal." And then he wasn't even immediately made king. His lord had a son, and that son eventually died, and Beowulf was going to help usher him into kingship. Yeah. That son dies because he made a foolish decision and housed some guys he shouldn't have in his home. And then Beowulf takes over once the kid is gone.
Okay.
And so it's not like everyone instantly renowned him as this great, wonderful thing. When he said he was going to do what he was going to do and fight Grendel, nobody knew if he could really do it.
Okay. That's... at this point, it's like pulling out small details, but there's some part of this where like he has trained and prepared in such a way to be in combat. Like that's the thing that makes him ready to face Grendel's mom.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The preparation is actually super useful. It's why he survives any of it.
Yep.
All the points you've drawn out of the technology actually helps him, right? The chainmail helps him sink to the bottom of the...
No, he swims to the bottom.
Does he?
And the chain, at one point in the story, he actually swims with chainmail and a sword on top of the water for a very long time. Cool. So they're not even like totally square on whether chainmail helps you sink or float. Sure. But he swims to the bottom, and then he finds the mother. He fights the mother for a little bit, and then she drags him to the lair, and that's where he finds the sword, kills her, cuts off Grendel's head, and then brings Grendel's head back, and they all have to drag it back. As far as I know, that takes less than a day. It's like evening when they finally roll in, and yeah, his chainmail is integral because she's got these big claws that would kill him otherwise.
Sure. Graham, am I misunderstanding? Are you more sensitive to this, more okay with this reading, I guess?
I am. But then my stipulation is always the story, then like the details need to be able to drive that interpretation.
Sure.
Seems like we're agreeing. I'm okay with an interpretation as it applies to life, but got to get the details right. Your reading has to be honest. And I think you have to acknowledge... But also, at least I like to acknowledge when I don't think the author intended it, but it does mirror life.
But that's what I'm asking of. Does it matter what was intended in the first place? To pull on details and say this one detail means technology is bad is probably not what the author would have thought, right? Or we don't know, I guess, is more specific.
Yeah.
So, if I was the author, I'd be cranky about it.
Sure. That's fair. These are all fair points. Okay. So that is what David White does in this section. I guess to... just full disclosure for me, I could not finish this book. I love David White. I love Constellations. He has another book called The Three Marriages, which is very good. It's about work and relationships and like hobbies and stuff. Like it's a very good book. But this one I couldn't finish, mostly because of these first 2 chapters, because I think these are bad readings of Beowulf. I don't know Beowulf as well as AJ does, but it's this pulling on details and putting too much weight on each one of them that bothered me in reading it, and so I just stopped reading it. So that, for whatever that's worth for me.
Well, bravo, Magby.
Yeah, thanks. But so
welcome.
What do you mean?
You're in the club of the malcontents with me and Hamburg.
I feel like I've already talked trash about enough people on this podcast. Anyway, David White, I very much respect you. Please listen to our podcast. Now, I think this matters less for Beowulf, but matters the same thing that White is doing with Beowulf, I think is done all the time in reading scripture. I won't go too much into this, but for Patreon listeners, I'll post a talk I've given called Reading Scripture for Interpretation about bad ways that scripture can be used to apply to certain situations. Usually, anyway, go listen to the talk. I think it's kind of okay. The problem I think that's happening here, and I want to see if you all agree with this or maybe not. So I guess you're getting at you know more of the details than I do to say he gets parts of it wrong. My problem is that maybe AJ is exactly what you said. He's taking good practical advice and grafting it onto a story where it wasn't in the story before. So like if you took out the Beowulf part and you just kept the advice that was don't depend on your technology too much, that's good advice regardless.
And deal with the thing that is causing you fear.
Yes, like you don't need the story to make those points. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of no point to having the story. Does that make sense?
He's using the story as a prop.
Yes. Or trying to use it to give credibility to his argument when the book doesn't actually do that.
When otherwise it just seems like a platitude.
Yes. I don't know about, I guess it would be a platitude.
To me, it seems like one.
If he just literally had a chapter that was like, face your fears. You know what I mean? But it's more like a persuasion technique at that point to say like, this deep secret is actually in Beowulf. But the one, I guess all things are like tensions and contradictions. He's applying a method. One of you pointed and called it allegory earlier, and I think that's the right word for it. And that's a method of reading I'm not generally comfortable with. But what's the right way to say this? Have you all ever had students read a book and get some like huge impactful takeaway from it that you've never read into that book?
Yes.
And
sure.
Is it wrong that they did that?
No.
So help me. Those feel like disconnected. Well, maybe Graham, for you it's connected.
It's only interesting, or if they're right.
Well, if they get a right takeaway from the book in the first place.
No, if the takeaway if the takeaway can fit with the rest of the book. Okay. I think about it this way. So there's like when you read a book or poem, you can read. So there's poems that I will read or a book that I will read, and it will remind me of something, and I will get a great amount of, same with songs, with music.
Yeah.
So you now have like personal connotations with songs. Mm-hmm. So you listen to a song. I listen to the White Stripes Elephant, and I am back in first year university.
Yeah.
And I can feel it. And so then that gives, like I associate that with like youth and freedom and this sort of like really fun, interesting time of life. And it's not necessarily in that album.
Right.
That's not what the album is about.
It's your interpretation.
But my association with it has that. So there's personal associations that you can have with a book.
Sure.
But if a student comes in and they've got some big brain idea about like, oh my goodness, isn't I'm trying to think. Isn't the character, I'm trying to think of Grapes of Wrath. Mm-hmm. Isn't the preacher in Grapes of Wrath? I can't remember his name, but his initials are JC. And so some student will be like, oh my goodness, isn't the preacher like Jesus Christ because his initials are JC? And it's like, okay, maybe. Let's take that idea and go with it. Does that fit with, and so, okay, he's a religious man, he's a preacher, okay, maybe there's something there. Does his story fit with using that kind of interpretation? Does he do some sort of sacrifice? Does reading him as a Messiah figure fit in with the rest of the story with all these other characters somewhere? Maybe not, because then there's anyway. So a student may have a big brain idea about something, but then you've got to make sure that it fits with everything else in the story. You can't just sort of take this as a lesson in isolation.
Sure.
And if you say the sword is like technology, Except he finds another one that saves him.
Sure.
So
And
all of a sudden, your
wasn't-
reading of technology as trash is no longer helpful
Sure.
because, yeah.
And like, it's not really new technology. It's not like
sword.
the Vikings invented the sword and he's
Yeah.
like, try this one. It's
Sure.
great. Like it's
Yeah, so it's just, yes, so every now and then students will do that, and it sort of has to fit. So I remember a couple years ago, I can't remember the student, I don't remember what year it was, but a student made reference to the fact that Raskolnikov, so this is in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov and Marmeladov, and we don't need to get into the details of it, are essentially doing the same thing, but they're thinking about God in the same way, but from opposite sides of an argument. And the student sort of pointed that out, and I had never seen that before, and was like, they are right.
Yeah.
Like that is a correct reading. That you now have these characters that have these parallel views from different sort of like attitudes. Yeah. So, there's stuff like that, but it has to fit with the rest of the story. And that's sort of, I think,
where you think White is getting off the track.
maybe,
right?
I don't know Beowulf, but from what AJ's saying, like it sounds like.
And but the thing is like if a student does that, if they say, "Hey, my life was changed by this book,"
right.
and they're saying, "Yeah, I changed in the Iliad because Patroclus was so giving, and like that's what I took away." I'd be like, "Well, he wasn't really." And
but then
I don't want to argue and be like your life lesson that you learned and it changed your life is wrong.
But that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
For me, it's like that verse. It's in Scripture and it talks about how all these dudes were preaching the gospel from bad motivations, right? To get famous and to get all this money and to do all these things. And at some point, I think it was Paul, he's like, I don't have a rip why they're preaching it. They're preaching it. Like the gospel's going out. And for me, if a student's life is changed and they are bettered by a book, even if it's a completely inaccurate reading of the book, we might have a conversation about it, but I'm not going to try to pull down their progress just because I am cranky about the way they read an old book. I think their progress is probably more important.
I think it's a fair point. I guess how would I say it? So, but what if if David White is giving good advice of you can't over depend on technology in this case, or you have to face not only the problem, but the mother of the problem, or you have to go to that dark place to overcome that dark place.
3 true things.
Yes. So if he says
three helpful things.
Yeah. And if those 3 helpful things are taught, even though it depends on a bad reading of Beowulf, is that still okay?
No.
Because?
So if I would never take issue with someone reading David's book and growing from it.
Yes.
I will take issue with a teacher teaching improperly.
This is helpful.
If a kid came to me and they're like, wow, you changed my life because of the way you read this book, but I had been reading it incorrectly.
Yeah.
Like that's still great advice, but as soon as I realized that, I should stop using the book and maybe figure out some other way to do it, or a different book that actually says that. There are books that say, don't depend on your technology.
Yeah.
Beowulf is not one of them.
Sure. That's helpful.
So it comes down, to...
But then you're a message in search of a source.
Yes.
Do you know what
And in fact,
That's
in the final fight in Beowulf, it's brand new technology, a steel shield that helps him survive the dragon. Wow. They usually use wood. Right. He didn't because he knew it would burn. So he had a brand new shield made, and that helped him not die.
Sure.
So it's
so cranky.
So
it's so good. That's awesome.
What was I going to say?
I'm in the same boat. I stopped reading the book.
Anyway,
yeah.
That's why. Welcome.
Thanks. Is that how that works? Great.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, so a reading like that maybe doesn't hold up to scrutiny, but is sort of helpful for the student at a time, is a good thing. Is helpful for the student at the time. But you haven't now taught the student how to go do that for himself from another book that he will find.
Sure, yeah.
Because you've said, I've read Beowulf, and here's the message. Here's the takeaway message. It's like, you shouldn't over-rely on technology. And the student will be like, tell me how you got that message. And he's like, well... when he dove down and the sword was technology, and the student would be like, oh, and
what about the other sword?
The shield?
Right.
And he'd be like, don't think about that. So then the student now the student doesn't
pay no attention to the shield behind the curtain.
Now the student doesn't have the tool to go and read Dante or something and be able to do the same thing. Yep. Or the student has now been taught, I can just ascribe symbolism to whatever I want in any way that I see fit, as long as it gives me some kind of like maxim statement.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work.
It is not a method that you can continue applying.
So you can't.
You've given him a fish.
That's right.
He can't fish himself.
He can't fish himself. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let me.
Good point, Donaldson.
That was really good.
Yeah.
Better phrase than I could have. So there are good and bad ways to read books, I guess is the way to say this. But that's not to say you can't still get something helpful out of a bad reading.
Correct.
Which is like an uncomfortable thing to like end with. But I think ought to be said. Again, if someone reads Beowulf and their takeaway is that they need to reconcile with their parents because, Beowulf had to kill Grendel's mom,
eventually he went back and helped a kid.
Yeah. And that's the thing of they can still have something good come from it, even if it's not what the story is actually about. And I don't think we should begrudge people that if it is a life-changing thing. I don't want to go too into it, but I think there are two ways of bad reading that are
I'm a little more begrudging people of that, even if it's a life-changing thing.
I thought you would be more open to this.
No.
Change your life back.
Exactly.
No, not change your life back, but it's awesome. That got you out of this one, but is it going to get you but if you are using the skill improperly, it's going to bite you some point.
Sure. Yeah. But let me try for what a few of these tools or methods or whatever might be called or named. We already pointed to one, which is allegory. I think the way to think of this is that you're taking only the story itself and immediately trying to apply it to your life situation. So this was AJ's critique earlier. It's both a critique and literally the definition of allegory. Beowulf is no longer Beowulf. He becomes a symbol for the conquering of man over difficult situations. Or Grendel is no longer Grendel, but becomes an image for unknown evil from outside the civilization or whatever. The characters are no longer themselves. They become, again, symbols for something else. That's an allegorical reading. They are dangerous because you can very quickly lose the core of the book or the message of the book. Mm-hmm. If your first time reading through Beowulf, you're like, what does Beowulf mean on page 2? You don't know what the book is about. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You are drawing messages from it that might have nothing to do with what the story is actually about. I think that's the danger of allegory.
I think one of the great dangers of allegory and drawing my own conclusions from things like that is that it inoculates me against what C.S. Lewis says is the reason we read old books, to have the attitudes of the old world impress themselves upon us and to inoculate us against the attitudes of our own world. If every book I read, I'm like, here is the lesson that fits right in with my life, I'm not actually learning from the book. I'm putting my current learning on the book, and I don't actually get their old attitudes, right? Yep. Beowulf is from a time that is totally alien to us.
Yes.
It's very different. And if my solution is don't trust technology, I don't think that ever would have crossed Beowulf's head at all.
Swords are good.
Exactly. Even we've had swords for forever. What technology are you talking about?
And he brought his sword in the first place, right? He thought it was good. Anyway,
and we've had chainmail for 100 years. Yeah. There's no such thing as new technology. Sure. I took the technology that we have, right?
But let me take that point and so allegory would be I apply the book just directly to my life, and all these details become symbols. Another method, which I think is closer to what you're saying there, but is still, I think, an inferior reading, is to read the book itself, have some understanding of what the book is about, and then apply that lesson to my life. So, said differently, I've read all of Beowulf, and I know that there are parts of the story that are about growing old and passing on power to the next generation, or there are lessons about bravery in this story that I can apply to my life right now. I think that's still a weaker reading because I think it's because of what you just said, though, AJ, that because the context is so different from where we are right now, I can't take a lesson from 3000, 2000. How old is this book?
This one was probably 900 to 1100, somewhere around there.
Okay, but I can't take a really old book and immediately apply it to my situation right now because 2020 is different from when Beowulf was being written. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's true in some ways, but in some other ways, the human experience has never changed.
Yes.
Humans are the same.
Yes, but I think this leads to a third, so again, bad form of reading. First is allegory. The second form is sometimes called moralism. You read a book, you get the lesson of that book, you apply it to your life directly, moralism. Mm-hmm. This third method would be to read within, I only ever have 4 topics I talk about, so this is one of them, the Great Conversation. So you take Beowulf, but Beowulf is not the only comment on courage, on growing old, on being an adult, on facing evil, on combat, on any of those things. It's not the only word on those things. So what do? We read Beowulf, and we read other books that come later that develop a theme that has started in Beowulf and then grown from there, to then get to what is the conversation around any one of those topics. And then at that point, we can say something intelligent about our time today.
I think it's also beneficial to, if we're going to read it, we can read the lessons that are actually there that we might miss because of our modern context. For example, when Beowulf goes to fight the dragon, all of his men abandon him, right? Every single one except for one.
Right.
Beowulf.
Right.
And Beowulf stays. But first, he goes to the woods and he says, you dopes, like you big cowards. He gave you swords and he was throwing them away.
Right.
And so the lesson here seems to be faithful to your Lord. Right. That is the mark of a courageous man, is faithfulness to a Lord. If the Lord has given you your due and has helped you make it in life, then you owe him your fidelity in your life.
Yes.
Right. And we don't have that same, like, I owe my senator so much because he's given so much for me. We don't have that same thing, but we do have an attitude towards authority that is often skeptical and negative, when the question should be, okay, what has the authority really given up for me, and what do I actually owe them?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I try to apply that here at school, and that means that sometimes I have to trust the administration, even if I think they're making a bad decision, because
but I think
that's their place. That they deserve it.
The argument I'm making is that it is better to read in that last way of across many thinkers, across many books, across time to read historically. But you can't do that for everything. Like, we have lives and we have stuff to do. And so I think there are good things to get from each level of reading, to which I'm agreeing with you, of like, you should take away those moral lessons from Beowulf. But I think those moral lessons can be deepened by reading it in the context of a conversation that intersects with Beowulf at some point. Does that...
Yeah, sure.
There
are a lot of old books that have to do with fidelity to your Lord, and
which would then, to your Lewis quote, would show fidelity is maybe a value we've lost in 2020, but has actually been really important for all of written history. We should therefore value fidelity more.
Yeah.
In
what way can we seek to rescue it?
Yeah. And that's so. But I guess this works both ways, to say that level of taking a moral from a book and applying it to my life is a good reading. It can be improved by reading more. Of course, I mean, this maybe ties in with your topic for next week, Graham, but a bunch of people who read books are going to tell you to read more books. But I would flip it to say, I do think there's still value in that allegorical reading, that there are true moral lessons we can take away from a book, even if it's a bad reading of the book. And this is not like a satisfying play. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
I don't like that. I mean,
which is fine.
That one makes me a little nervous. It's kind of like, you really need to use the bathroom, so you poop in your sink. Like,
technically does the job.
It technically does the job, but that's not a habit you want to develop.
That is fair.
Right? That's kind of how I think about it. Sorry. That was a little...
You're thinking about
I'm
that?
laughing because my grandpa had to do that.
Yeah, right.
Really?
Like, you were in such a place of...
Toilet didn't work. Nothing was installed.
Any
there
harbor
was
in a storm, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
But... as like
any harbor in a storm.
I mean,
but you don't want to use that as like your method moving forward.
I guess I'm trying to leave space,
because it's gonna crop up more problems in the future. Like,
yes, I guess I'm just trying to leave space for that category we said earlier of your student reads something, gets a lesson that like you don't think is in there, but still like radically transforms their life or is helpful for them. I don't think depending on that is helpful. I'm just trying to say, I don't know.
Maybe I'm more cynical. I always in my mind think like,
he doesn't actually say that.
As soon as you read that book again in 5 years, you're going to realize that you're wrong, or or not realize that you're wrong. You're going to be like, oh, I can't believe I thought that when I was 15. And,
but I think that's more the work of the person introspecting. Like they are realizing something in their life needs fixing, much more so than the book says X.
Yeah, that's
maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So
it's not a good way to read a book, but
so the book's then's a mirror.
Yes, exactly.
Even though it's the book is not. It's not what the book isn't intending to be one.
Yes. Or
it just ends up being one because of the person reading it.
And you're forced to read it. I don't know. So again, these are. I have wanted to say in writing my notes, there are actual notes on this one. Thank you. I've wanted to say allegorical readings are bad, but like again, I'll post the Patreon talk on like reading the Bible. I would like to say allegorical readings of the Bible are bad, but when you read the first 1,000 years of church history,
they're all doing it.
They're all allegorical.
In fact, Paul
readings.
even does it.
Yes, which is a whole other fun topic. So like, when St. Augustine looks at Proverbs 31, which is about like a righteous woman, and he sees like, this is about the persecuted church. And like, it's like, I don't think it is, but he's earlier in the church than I am.
Yeah.
He's closer to something than I am. And so what am I trying to say?
Yeah.
He's flipping St. Augustine.
Yeah, that's my point.
Who are you, Thomas?
Exactly. In the same way of like, I just want to leave space for allegorical readings. Don't have to be all bad. So that's my first one of like, at least have some level of comfort with an allegorical reading, to at least engage it on the level of this is a mirror. I think that's the right way to put it, Graham, of the student or whoever's reading. I don't just mean high schoolers. I mean, whoever's reading it as a student of the work, let them do that work for themselves of reading into it, processing their life through that story.
Okay, I will.
When you all talk about Great Expectations being a bad book, I love that book because I went through something similar to Pip.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so that's not the book being good or bad. That's I see my story in the book, and it's helpful for me processing some part of my life.
You saved a convict and he made
Yeah, did you? That's exactly right. And then my blacksmth dad paid off my debts. It was a really crazy time.
I think it might not be that the book is bad. It's just that I've never been a wealthy man.
Yeah, right. Or,
what is my experience? How does it connect with Pip at all?
Sure.
It doesn't.
Yeah, that might be another topic for another time because you need some level of connection. Anyway. So that's the first one, but which would then lead to being comfortable with people having different takeaways from a book. But I think that's not to say the book says different things to different people. It's that different people are going through different things while reading the same book.
Yeah.
So which at some level has nothing to do with the book, but it's still, it just happened to be the time when they discovered something.
Yeah, we sort of have this conversation when we read Hamlet,
Yep.
because Hamlet tries to use a text, a book, but it's a play. It tries to use a play to figure out the soul of somebody else. So he's trying to figure out if the king is guilty or not, and he uses a text. And the question is like, wait, do you actually think books can do that? Like, can books reveal your soul to people who observe your relationship with those books?
Yes. Right.
Yeah, and so that's sort of an interesting question, because what we're talking about is, okay, if I watch The Murder of Gonzago, which is the play that Hamlet watches, or that Claudius watches, like, and I myself was a murderer who got away with it,
right.
and it really gnawed at my soul. That's not what The Murder of Gonzago is about. It's supposed to be like a fun little murder mystery.
Right.
But if I read and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a terrible person. Hamlet assumes that literature has that power to do that.
Sure.
And so, that the subjective personal reading of a book or listening of a song is like an interesting portion of it. I guess that's how I always regulate. I always regulated allegorical readings as like, all right, man, like Origin, you do you, buddy.
Sure.
Or like Augustine, like
go crazy.
Go for
Yeah,
it. Persecuted church, like
Awesome.
Write it up.
Sure.
But like, we're not going to like build a corporation around this.
That's
you know,
fair.
like
Yeah,
we're not
sure.
going to like have this be canon or something. But
That's fair.
now the question is,
But why not?
when
right?
are
Yeah.
allegorical readings canon?
Yep.
Or canonical readings?
But I think those are different. Again, I'm almost trying to separate of like the change in your life that you need to make based on reading a book is different from what the book actually says in it. And maybe listeners will hate this idea, but write in and tell me. So just to say, that's that first part of like, people will have radically different readings, not because of the book itself, but because of the person reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the truer, like the actual correct readings of books come from reading the whole book, and looking for a theme across an entire book, but then also looking at how that book has been interpreted over time. We're not the first ones to read Beowulf. I'm sure every translator of it has commented on like what this book is about. We can connect those and see how has this been read, over the past 1,000 years or whatever. And then in the same vein of what I just said before, yes, it's good to get a lesson from a book. The deeper lesson is to read many books on a topic, to see how that thought has developed over time, and then what to do with that in 2020. So I think those are main takeaways there. I think there are many examples of books that do this well and maybe better than Heart Aroused. Sorry. It was like a New York Times bestseller in 94. So for whatever that's worth, probably nothing. Josh Gibbs' How to Be Unlucky, which we've done on another episode, is him reading his story through the lens of Boethius.
I think that's a good example of doing that. And then also, although I've never read it, but I've heard it's really good, Rod Dreher's reading of Dante.
How Dante Can Save Your Life. Yeah, it's I can't.
Have you read it?
I have, and I can't comment. It's part of why I'm reading Purgatory right now.
Yeah.
But AJ would know more. I can't speak to whether it's a good reading of Dante. I'm putting that in air quotes.
Yeah.
But like his life was changed by his time through all three of those books. I'm not going to begrudge him that. You know, like I wouldn't say you didn't read it very well because it did what it was intended to do.
But there are books that are that seem to more closely nudge or expect, maybe that's it, that expect the reader's going to be doing that. And
Yes.
I think Dante's Divine Comedy
Right.
is a lot more and Consolation of Philosophy.
Yep.
Those are books that I think have a expectation that their reader is going to superimpose themselves on it.
Yes.
And Beowulf is not.
That's an interesting thought, because Boethius literally puts himself in the story. Dante literally puts himself in the story. That's almost the tip off. That's the method. Just one other a story I like that does this is Eugene Peterson's Under the Unpredictable Plant. It's the telling of it's him interpreting his
Jonah?
Yeah, his ministry life through the story of Jonah. I think it's a really, really good book. And
a story to pick for talking about your ministry.
Yeah,
life.
exactly. But that's what makes it great is like he
I originally said no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or he has this part where he's like, I
ran away.
Then I fell out of a boat.
Yeah.
But that's
which is literally his story of like he tried to leave 3 or 4 times, and every time God brought him back. And anyway, it's a really good book, Under the Unpredictable Plant, especially if you work in a ministry setting. Did you want to read something? Where
I was looking for
AJ was just getting a little restless. No.
no, there's so J.R.R. Tolkien actually has one of the seminal criticisms of Beowulf itself, and one of the things he talks about is how everyone seems to want to plummet for historicity and all this other things. He's like, it's a work of art, right? And
cool.
It's a story not even made up by the poet himself.
Right.
He's clearly saying somebody else's story. I was trying to look for something pertinent to what you were talking about, where we look for one thing and Beowulf would be another.
Sure.
I didn't find anything. It's too long a criticism to find what I want to find.
But even like that point would fit into the conversation about Beowulf. Maybe we should come to the conclusion of we shouldn't look for the deeper meanings. It's just a really good story. And that's a fine, anyway, you all will still have some like minor disagreements there, but
I find that it's helpful to envision, especially these stories. So Beowulf, the Iliad, the Odyssey, these are primary and secondary epic.
Yes.
Where the place in which they would have been delivered is the setting in which you should imagine yourself reading them. So if you are going to read Beowulf, you should imagine yourself sitting in your very best clothes that cost you months of worth of salary, right? The very best of the very best. You're eating the best food you've ever had. You are around the most wealthy and important people in the realm. And in front of you is someone who has been brought to entertain you with a story of bravery.
Sure.
And so you sit with your ale, with your friends, with the senators and the most important people, with a king who is your benefactor and who's been doing good things for you, whom you support. Mm-hmm. And then he has provided you with this entertainment. It will change your experience entirely of reading the book. You don't, like, very few people were probably sitting there thinking,
what is this about?
This is clearly that I have to tackle my problems by approaching the mother of my problems. Sure. Like, that's not what they were thinking, right? It's a different experience. I find that that's helpful for my students as well as me when I read these old epics.
Yeah, I mean, it's also telling that, like, all of our descriptive models for what these stories mean come from the early 20th century. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not, whoever wrote Beowulf didn't say, I'm basing this off of the hero myth. You know, like,
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, man, I feel like this is going to spawn lots of other future podcasts.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah.
You'll probably have more refined thoughts. I ramble for as long as I can.
I'm glad that you did me the solid of preventing me from reading that book. Now I never have to read it.
I didn't think you would want to, nice. But I didn't get, again, I only made it to the first 2 chapters. I think he does Dante for 2 of the chapters too. Like the Inferno is one of his.
Same kind of stuff?
I would assume so. I never read it. That's the thing. I quit after the Beowulf chapters.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think you can do it. I just think it's harder than people think it is.
Yes.
Or I think actually you should feel free to give up when you're not getting any blood from that stone. Like there are just some books that maybe just don't have enough breadcrumbs to lead you to that kind of thing.
Or don't bring your own notions to the book. Draw the book's notions out.
Oh, but that's, again, Consolations is great. His book of essays is great because he doesn't do that part. He just says his ideas. And like they're really interesting ideas. I just don't, you don't have to pretend that, they're in Beowulf because they're not, which is fine. Just tell me the idea.
Cool. Well, this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know with Thomas, AJ, and Graham. We thank you for listening. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. You can find us on Twitter at classicalstuff, CLSSCAL stuff. You can patronize us at patreon.com/classicalstuff. Is that it?
Yeah.
And you can find all of our episodes on classicalstuff.net. Thanks for listening, and we appreciate you guys emailing us funny things. And yeah, cool.
We love interacting with you guys.
Yeah,
it's really nice.
Great. It really is.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.